So here we go. The question is, millennials, are you listening? Because if communication by definition is to understand and be understood, and if communication is bilateral, then if one party doesn't understand what the other party's saying, we have miscommunication. And millennials, if you're down here in the hierarchy of power and you report to someone up here, this person has the ability and the authority to promote you. You want to make sure that you're understanding what this person's saying to you. And in order to understand, you're going to have to make sure you're listening. Well, that sounds obvious, doesn't it? Yeah, well, I guess it isn't too obvious, because this is one of the biggest complaints that supervisors have about millennials is they don't listen. So here's the way you can test yourself. If you're not listening, there's 3 reasons for it. The first reason is your mind is distracted by something else. Classic example, do not bring your smartphone into a meeting. Do not be distracted by somebody sending you something on Twitter or checking your Facebook account or just checking for a text message. Because anything that distracts you from hearing somebody else is going to lead to miscommunication. Besides that, and regrettably millennials do this, they have their smartphones with them all the time. It makes your supervisor think that you don't even care about the job. You care more about what your friend had for breakfast. So when we're listening, we're focused. And the way that you do that with your supervisors is you make eye contact. You make eye contact, and like we said in the first video, you repeat things back. It just shows the other person that you're actively listening, and they'll never be upset about it. They'll actually be impressed. So number 1 is be focused. Don't be distracted. Number 2 is don't be thinking about what you're gonna say next. And see, the thing is, if I'm having a communication session with you and you're saying whatever you're saying that I should be focused on, but I'm actually thinking about what I'm going to say next, and I'm formulating a response or maybe a rebuttal or even an argument, if I'm concentrating on what I'm going to say next, I am not focused on you. But the trouble is, you can't tell if I'm not focused on you because it all happens up here. Now, you can certainly tell if I'm on my smartphone, but you can't tell if I'm thinking something else. But here's the thing, if you are thinking something else, you're going to miss the communication. Communication is to understand and be understood. You will not understand what the other person's saying because neurologically you can't. You can't carry on 2 conversations at the same time. You can't be fully engaged in listening to one person if you've got another conversation going on in your head, which is you thinking about what you're going to say next. And if you don't believe me, hey, I don't have a problem if you don't believe me, but I'm clinical. I'll prove it to you. Just get 2 friends to stand on either side of your ear, and both of them are going to tell you a story at the same time. It's 2 conversations. They need to talk for a minimum of 45 seconds. And when the 45 seconds is over, you just tell both of them exactly what the 2 of them said. You won't be able to do it. See, the brain neurologically cannot focus on 2 conversations at the same time, even if one of those conversations is happening internally, mentally. So if you're thinking about what you're going to say next, by definition, you're not listening. Now, here's the third part about not listening. And it's going to sound really obvious, but it happens all the time. If you interrupt somebody mid-sentence, by definition, you cannot be listening. Because you don't even know what they were going to say when they completed their sentence. This is why you want to watch the Dr. Jordan Peterson and Kathy Newman interview. This is a classic example of dysfunctional communication. Kathy Newman, she's a journalist. She's supposed to be interviewing a world-renowned expert on social psychology. She's got an expert in her studio. A journalist is supposed to ask a question and then sit back and listen to the answer. And having listened to the answer, as we said in our first video, she might want to ask probing questions to gain deeper understanding. This is very simple. If you're a journalist, if you're a broadcaster and you're interviewing, you ask the person you're interviewing a question and then you shut up and listen. And if what the other person says is short and succinct and very easy to understand, you can repeat back exactly what they're saying to demonstrate that you're actually listening. If it's a little more complicated, a little more extended, maybe a little more obtuse, then ask probing questions to gain understanding. But if you're interrupting, you have to cognitively come up with the thing that you're interrupting about, which means you're thinking about your rebuttal, and you reactively come out with the rebuttal, which proves that you're not listening in the first place. So when you watch this video, you're going to see how many times Kathy Newman, who's supposed to be a professional at interviewing, how many times she interrupts Dr. Peterson. We took this video as an exercise at Ararat Consulting. We took the staff and we said, okay, here's the exercise. Count how many times Kathy Newman interrupts the very person she's supposed to be listening to. And you know what? We actually stopped the exercise after less than a third of the interview. Like not even 10 minutes into it, we stopped it because everybody said, this is the most ridiculous example of communication or interviewing we've ever seen. We don't need to watch the whole thing. How many times is that woman interrupted? Well, you can watch the video and you can count for yourself. But I think what it was in those first 9.5 minutes is that she had interrupted Jordan Peterson on average at least once every minute. I mean, she's supposed to be asking questions and receiving information, maybe asking probing questions based on what Dr. Peterson says, but she doesn't even give him a chance to respond. Here's another thing that'll be almost entertaining. Find out how many times Kathy Newman says, so you're saying. Now don't get me wrong, that could be good. That's the equivalent of repeating things back. But when you repeat things back, you would say, if I heard you correctly, boss, you want me to get the Henderson report that's on top of your desk and give it to Jane. Very simple. You're repeating back the instruction the boss gave you. Kathy Newman doesn't do that. Kathy Newman says, so you're saying, and it's not a question, it's a statement. And then she says something completely different or convoluted to what Dr. Peterson actually is saying. I'll give you an example, and you'll find this about midway in the interview. This is great. So Newman says to Peterson, let me put something else to you from, this is Dr. Peterson's book. You say the introduction of equal pay for equal work, that the argument immediately complicates even salary comparison beyond practicality, which by the way is what Dr. Peterson's book does say. And you say that for one simple reason. Dr. Peterson's premise is, if you want equal pay for equal work, he's a clinical psychologist, everybody. He says, well, who decides what work is equal? And that's an intelligent question. That's what a thinking person would ask. But see, that's not going to work for Kathy Newman. When Dr. Peterson says, who decides what's equal, making that decision is subjective. It's a judgment call, and depending on the perspective of the person asking the question, you're going to get a myriad of responses and perspectives. It's exactly what Dr. Peterson says. He says, it's not possible. So Kathy Newman says, so here's a simple question, do you believe in equal pay? Well, she just quoted from his book. His book says, who decides what equal pay is? It's impossible. The answer is in her own question. Peterson's response is, well, I made the argument there. And then he starts to say it depends on, but Kathy interrupts him, says, so you don't believe in equal pay? It's like, Kathy, are you listening? He never said that at all. As a matter of fact, he tried to explain what the answer to your question was when you quoted him and quoted him accurately, and his premise was intelligent. And now what you do is you interrupt him and you put words in his mouth and saying you don't believe in equal pay. Well, at this point in time, Peterson, and the guy, I understand, this is like 15 minutes into the interview. At this point in time, it's so comical, I don't think he can help himself. Peterson starts laughing. He says, no, I'm not saying that at all. Because she's an interviewer. She's supposed to be objective. She's now putting words in his mouth. She's putting contradictory words in his mouth. But she's putting in contradictory words based on her quoting him. And then she's not even paying attention to the quote that she's using. I mean, it's absolutely comedic. Newman goes on to say to Peterson, because a lot of people are listening to you, and they're just going to say, I mean, we're going back to the Dark Ages. How Kathy Newman makes a connection between trying to quantitatively equate equal pay when there's a multifactorial myriad of influences whereby you can't even define equality. Like, where she makes that statement by Dr. Peterson, which is an intelligent statement, where she says that throws you into the Dark Ages. It's like, how did you go from 21st century intellectual pursuit to Dark Ages? It's just an absolutely ridiculous comment. So when she says, because a lot of people are listening to you and they're going to say, are we going back to the Dark Ages? Dr. Peterson's response is, well, that's because you're not listening.